Hi, I'm Jussi Ängeslevä from ART+COM and the University of Arts in Berlin and Royal College of Art in London. So what I want to talk is to draw attention to the importance of thinking of the tools with which we create. So in a way, creating the tools is as important as using the tools to create things as designers. So hopefully this talk will inspire people to be more considerate and more thinking about the creation process as such and how the tools affect our way of thinking.
Good morning, everyone. Do you hear me? Yes. Okay. Good morning, everyone. I have pretty high bar today because we had such a wonderful conference already yesterday. I've been having a sleepless night trying to figure out what to talk to you about today. I'm here supposedly giving you some inspiration, but I must say that I'm oftentimes in the receiving end, and I've been so inspired by all the new information, new knowledge, new insights that I've received here already. So hopefully I have something to give back to you. This is what I often feel also in my daily work. I'm based in Berlin at the University of Arts and at ART+COM, and also in London at the Royal College of Art. And the university works is often the case that as much as I try to help the students are also very much inspiring about new things. And the kind of thinking between disciplines, between technologies, creative work, between academia and industry, that's sort of my home base, which is in between the kind of traditional disciplines. So what I want to do today for the next 58 minutes and 37 seconds is to try to talk to, I have two things to talk about. One is the sort of a transition about the processes and ways of communicating and telling stories in the digital media, in space, in physical media. And the other one is addressing more like a product design, looking at new ways of making things where algorithms meet machines making things. Something like this. And then the first part is focusing on the studio work at ART+COM, and the second one is about my work at the university. So without further ado, I'll get started. The studio ART+COM, we are about 50 people, plus then 50 to 100 depending on the time of the year and the number of projects running. So we have lots of freelancers, but the core team is a little bit over 50. We are doing many different kinds of things. So if you look at our website, we have 3 doors to enter the studio. One is about arts, the other is communication, and the third is research. And those are 3 different doors, but they lead to the same room. So we are a team, and now I'm here talking as like representative of the 50 to 100 people. So I always feel a little bit bad because I become then the face of this team, and the innovation and new creativity like this, it always happens as a teamwork in my world. So you cannot be expert in all the fields necessary to make the kinds of things that we're doing. So this is just to give you a little impression that we are making exhibitions, media in space like this. We have interactive installations, this kind of stuff. But my focus today is shifting from these kinds of things. So media that is programmed in software, that is moving pixels on screen, into these kinds of things that are using the same kind of processes but are actually physically present outside the bounds of the computer screen or projection or LED matrix or something like this. This is a journey that we actually, I would say for me, it started in 2006. We did a small project in Tokyo where we combined mechanical actuators with LED matrix on the floor. But when it really became kind of mainstream in some way was a commission that we were working on at the BMW Museum in Munich. So they were revamping their kind of their history, so not their showroom of the future stuff, but their history. And we did many installations there, but the opening for this whole museum, when you enter the space, more or less the first thing you experience, we were asked to create some sort of a representation, kind of artistic intervention of design process. Now, design process, what does that mean? You can tell the story, you can interview the designers and so forth. We wanted to create something that would embody the values and qualities of our client. So, and this is kind of the moment, the iconic moment when a new product comes to the market. You unveil it with this kind of a fabric and you pull it off and you see the new thing. We kind of used that as the starting point, then thought of different kinds of things. How could we create this sort of structure in physical space that it could become a medium? So we did lots of software modeling. This was the sort of a more or less the final form that we ended up with, some 714 spheres that would be moving up and down, and the number was so that something representational in the world of cars would be possible to present. But of course, this is now pixels on screen. To really understand how this would work and how it would feel, we quickly proceeded in creating this kind of a physical prototype, 25 metal spheres hanging from stepper motors and then controlled by software. Now, you could say that this is like a hardware prototype with which you can test if it works or not. But for us, this was much, much more. I mean, and since it's a prototype, you have to, first of all, try to get handle of how things work. So you're designing the tools with which you end up designing the story. Now, since you can't afford the full 700-odd motors, we mixed the software prototype like this with the physical prototype. So you could look at the close-up, the individual movement, the kind of feeling that the motor, the physical movement in space can create, together with seeing the big picture on software. In the end, this was also like, so really like getting the hardware in control, understanding how it would work in space, helping us design the kind of a larger choreography, but in the end, and also understanding the mechanical constraints, running it for half a year so that we know that it doesn't break. But in the end, it was also very much a communication tool. It was only after the client had seen this physical thing, they had lots of doubts about if it makes sense and if it's too expensive and all these kind of things. But when they saw this, they realized the impact because it was undeniable reality. It was physically there. It was in front of you. So this was kind of the go-ahead for us. So the prototypes are extremely important for communication within your own head, within the team, but also towards the clients, because it makes so many things implicitly clear that you don't need to talk about them anymore. So then, but this is still a creative medium, so we spend lots of time choreographing and creating the actual storyline that I'll get into a minute. But before getting there, hardware is hardware, and you don't have undo button if you have some issues with the software the same way if you write software alone. So this was a few weeks before the opening. We had the full grid operating, and then there was a little bug in the software. So suddenly the undo, instead of Apple Z or Control Z, became manually coiling many wires onto the drums before the whole thing could run again. But in the end, it all went well. We had enough time, and this is now a short video clip of the result. So, what does this have to do with process of design? So we kind of start with chaos. So there's lots of ideas floating in space. These ideas are not really formed, they are abstract ideas. And then in the design process of all this inspiration, you start then kind of sketching different, more concrete ideas, like, you know, these kind of particular features, some concepts that you then try out and test in different constellations. And once you have kind of worked enough and you have these different core ideas, then you start comparing them, you try it and how they might work together before you then end up with the kind of desired result. So even though this story might not be visible to the average guest who comes into the space, so he doesn't think of comparing different design ideas when he sees this kind of forms morph there. It's extremely important from the point of view of the design process because it gives us some sort of a frame of reference to create a kind of a dramaturgy and a narrative arc for the whole installation. So even if the audience doesn't necessarily explicitly experience it, I'm convinced that the kind of the intuitive perception of there being a bigger story is absolutely necessary to get the kind of quality in the work. And this quality, it was actually, so it was surprising, and in the end I feel like kind of misleading, but it also shows the kind of power of shifting from screen into the physical space. This happened the year after the opening, and this has in the end nothing to do with us anymore. So the BMW marketing team were obviously at the museum and they saw the sculpture and they were very inspired by it. So they took that as the mascot for the launch of the new Series 5 BMWs in their global campaign. Now the thing is that if you haven't been to the museum or now heard me talking about it, this looks like 3D rendering, right? And if it's a 3D rendering, you could do so much more than move things up and down on fixed grid. And it kind of loses the elegance if you lose the physicality of it when you are making a marketing clip like this. But at the same time, once you have seen it live once, you cannot take it out of your head anymore. You don't see these things moving up as abstract things. They are real. They're real in the physical space. And I think this is very powerful about this kind of when the media shifts from the virtual space into the physical. So it kind of really, you cannot see the world the same way anymore afterwards. And in the end, it wasn't only the marketing team from BMW who got inspired by it. There were many other people who were also inspired by this thing. And I mean, you could say that this is kind of a, okay, it's copy plagiarization. But at the end, I mean, having motors, it's also part of how technology develops. I mean, nobody's asking a painter, oh, you're using a painting, like a canvas and a brush. I mean, like other people have done that before. It becomes kind of part of the culture, and I'm glad that we have inspired people to do things that, in the end, of course, it's not so easy to have the balance between creating sort of hardware that is expensive and difficult to do, but still keep the sort of the kind of creative focus that what you do with that has the quality that the effort that you put into making it justifies. So you don't want to end up doing test patterns with very expensive kit. Then we also copy ourselves. So that's what I mean is that it was so we ended up doing another piece that used the same technique because it was very fitting in the context. So if you ever fly over Singapore airport, you will see this in the Terminal 1. This is kind of inspired by the tropical theme of the whole airport. This is the tropical rain in these copper drops that are... In the end, we thought that we're doing the same kind of technical who use the same technique, but in the end, because the context is different, the dimensions are different, the motors are different, the software control were complete. So basically, it was a completely new project, even though to the sort of unsuspecting eye looks like, okay, this is one of like the same thing again. But it's in the end for us, it was a completely different process. So this was, so that's the starting point. Now I'm shifting, kind of getting more and more involved in the meaning in the physical side of the material, and not not using only the digital methods to control the physical space, but also leveraging the physical properties of these objects even more. Not just having the limitation of you can only move it up and down, but taking advantage of the physical presence. So this is now some 6 years ago, Shanghai Expo. Did anyone go? No. This is what we expected to see there. So we decided that we are probably not in position to compete with making a bigger screen. Our client for this was a German medical technology company called Otto Bock. And what they're famous for, they are doing prosthetics. They're prosthetics and kind of body technology like that. And we, ART+COM, we are a communication company. So we put those two things together. We use a traditional way of communicating. You know, sunlight and a mirror. You can communicate very fast from the top of a mountain to the top of the next. So mirror in the hand, sunlight, and 100 of their products. We painted them white so that they don't look quite so creepy, and stuck a mirror on them. But the mirror was carefully aligned in a particular way, and we then put a single axis motor behind the wall and pointed a badass spotlight onto this grid, so that by turning the hands, you could then spell very little, but appropriate in the context, this one Chinese character denoting mobility. So a small installation, 100 by 100, so 10 by 10 grid of prosthetic hands rotating around single axis, but so that the individual mirrors were aligned so that in a particular moment of time, the pixels would align to spell this one word. And since you have like 50,000 people running through every hour, you don't really need to show anything else. So this is a projector that can show only one picture. So often what we are doing in our work, people want to defer the decision of the meaning, and therefore saying that, okay, digital media is very good because it's a screen and you can then decide later on, you can change it all the time. But the more you leave things for change, for future, the less you have impact at the present. So this is kind of the extreme case of that, where the projector can only show one picture. But in this case, it's the picture that is relevant for the context. So lights and mirrors, this was a very, so this was like, okay, mechatronic control and then lights and mirrors as the medium. We kind of tried to work further on these themes. We felt kind of empowered and okay, now we know how this works. We were commissioned by another big German company. Maybe you recognize this logo. This is Deutsche Bank, and they were doing their kind of new headquarter communication platform. And our exhibition design partners decided that they would use the logo, kind of classic Stankovsky, as the space core of the space design element. So we took the diagonal bar of the space element and sliced it into these polygons, so that when you are moving through the space, there's the vantage points where you kind of take your position towards the brand. This is a kinetic sculpture that tells the kind of the story of the values in very, very abstract way of Deutsche Bank. Now the core elements are the physical movement, the lighting, projection mapping, and the shadows. So it's kind of leveraging much more of the physical properties. It's not just pixels in space. Now, when you shift from moving things up and down on wires as individual pixels to saying that, okay, well, we would like to make it into like a kinetic projection mapping 3D plane, how hard can it be? You just need 3 motors and you can tilt and move, right? It ended up being extremely more difficult, because you end up like the precision that you need to do this kind of a tilt control together with the movement ended up creating endless problems with all sorts of jitter and resonance that were unwanted results. But in the end, it all worked well, and we got this sculpture built together. But in the end, for me, it felt an overkill. So this projection mapping into a moving object and having this high precision control meant that the time to kind of solve the technical problems were kind of eating into the time that you can spend on reflecting and designing the experience. But with lots of blood, sweat and tears, all things came to a good conclusion. There would be many other anecdotes that I would like to tell, but maybe I leave it for another opportunity in terms of the kind of content-wise. Oh, maybe I'll have that moment. So when this installation, we did many. This installation was supposed to be telling the story of the CEOs of Deutsche Bank over the years. Now, because it was an important story, we could afford making complex and impressive thing. But since the story was what it was supposed to be, we had like pictures and text describing the characters. And we used those as the material for the video mapping and this kind of stuff. And then a few weeks before the opening, the current CEO finally, after we having struggled a lot to get the physical system working and operational on site, he came to see it in the kind of a preview. And then just a half an hour before the last tweaks were done so that it was finally working properly, and everybody like, oh wow, yes, we got it in time, so now it looks beautiful and it's perfect. Then like just few minutes into the choreography, then the boss says, no, stop, this is completely wrong. And of course, heart will sink at that moment. And so his feedback was to say that this work is way too beautiful to waste into these mugshots and this kind of narrative, formal story that would be better to read in a book. So the kind of feedback from the top in the end, after having seen the impact of the piece, was to say, get rid of the stuff that is better communicated elsewhere and focus on the essence of what this medium can do. So then we had a couple of weeks' time to completely revamp the software to create the animations that really play with the form. So, and this is maybe important when you are working with commercial clients, is that there's always politics, and if there's new technology, if you do these kind of things, there's this kind of, the motivation is also very often to say, we are innovative, and we are looking into the future. And this story is very easily overriding the focus on what you can tell, the kind of experience and the impact what you can possibly do with this kind of work. So it was great that we had the time to then go back and look more closely of the potential. Much less hassle and much kind of, more elegant process was the entrance to the same space. We wanted to create this kind of a static kinetic. The idea is very simple. We have a mirror on the wall, mirror that is fragmented in such a way that when you're standing in the right place, a picture comes together. So as you enter the space, you take the steps up into this exhibition, and at some point, these fragments fall into place into a recognizable picture. So here you can also appreciate that the geometry is already very much kind of based on the geometry. So the mirror geometry and the picture that it shows, the logo, is already part of the same. But I mean, once you calculated this once in software, you glued the mirror, then there's no debugging, there's no restarting, it works because it's in the physical space. Now, okay, so kinetics, and then light as a medium, and then lots of gray hair because of the kinetic means that laws of physics are not always your friends. And then the pleasure of saying you do the lights, you design mirrors, and once it's done, it works. With this experience, now we got very lucky and got a very, very nice commission in South Korea, in Gwangju, to create an artistic installation referring to the refurbishment of the 4 main rivers of South Korea. That was the brief. Do something that has some relation to the river. It was a 7-year project. They did like new weirs, cultural areas, cleaned the Cleanty rivers, and so forth. And in one of these pavilions on side of one of the rivers, we got the space to create an artistic installation. So I was inspired by the way the light plays with the water surface, the kind of caustic reflections that it creates. So we wanted to create a frozen moment of time as a river in a way, but then encode meaning into that in this kind of a calculate once, run forever way like the Deutsche Bank mirror was. Now, doing that, we first did very quickly software prototype to get a sense of how many pixels might be necessary in what kind of size surface, and how would the movement feel like if you had a single point of light. So the white dot over there, this is now representing the flashlights that the user would have in his hand. And as you would move and find the focus plane, all the different facets of this computational surface would focus the light to creating something legible. So that's the idea. So you shine a flashlight onto a sculpture, and then the flashlight spotlight focuses into a picture. So software prototype to say, okay, it might work, was then the obvious next step, what to say, really, really rough and tumble prototype to say, well, does it, like, could it work? So we just 3D milled a rough geometry with the alignments of the pixels roughly there, and then started gluing small pieces of mirror into it. Turns out the accuracy was absolutely not there, so you couldn't really see anything. But what you could see was the beautiful way the pixels would move in space. And this was really nice, so that kind of gave us the focus that it's not only the picture that we want to get, but it's also the movement of the pixels that is very powerful. At the same time, looking at the surface, if you make a sculpture, the sculpture should not feel like a projector, but it should also be meaningful and aesthetically appropriate by itself. So we started again very quickly, how could we then manufacture this? Because gluing mirrors is not the option. So this is a 3D milled surface, spray painted silver. You can imagine that this doesn't work. The surface is absolutely not optically enough. And also it doesn't feel like water. It doesn't look like water. So Voronoi to rescue. So this is a common kind of geometry processing algorithm to slice to slice a surface into kind of organic looking planes. And this was something that gave us the possibility to then create this kind of overall geometry that would look like water, and then microgeometry where we could align the single pixels to create the desired effect, and that it would be manufacturable with the milling machine. So this was the first, not the first, but maybe the fifth milling test on hard foam block of 10 centimeter thickness of round about a couple of thousand pixels. So this is now the raw geometry, and then the next iteration of prototyping was to find out how can we coat it so that we get the optical quality on the surface. And on the left side you see kind of blobby, non-planar, lots of filler before the silver coating. You lose the accuracy and resolution, and then the picture on the right you see basically the final solution. So we did lots and lots of testing on the material side. So first, like purely software prototyping, then software prototyping leading to kind of rough hardware mirror gluing thing, and then shifting into the milling machine production prototyping, how to do the coating, how to create the final surface, so that in the end, this was then the final parameters that, after again lots of blood, sweat, and tears, was legible as characters, but also ended up being like a 3D rendering engine hard-coded in material. So this was really nice that you get this kind of almost like a feeling of a galaxy by moving a flashlight towards and away from this panel. Suddenly the pixels, after having formed the shape, then they kind of expand and explode like a like some sort of star field. But in this case, again, like the design process was absolutely not the creative designer says that I want to make this sculpture and I draw it like this and then you do that and this happens. But it was a very, very, like, this looks actually a little bit like the neural network graphs that we saw yesterday. This was the parameter space and how all the different input parameters would affect the output focus and shape of the installation. So LED lamp size, light brightness, field of view, light cone shape on one side, then the size of the sculpture, the distance to the wall, the distance from the viewer, the angle of incidence. I mean, like if you're pointing straight down and you have like you need to tilt the polygons a lot, you end up losing lots of light in the in-betweens. This became like really this kind of like optimization of this, not a neural network, but still like this parameter space that in the end, that seems like an elegant final solution was really this continuous negotiation between experts who knew of these different aspects that then together kind of pulled the solution. But this is then how it looked like when setting up the installation, and this is the final thing on site. So you can kind of see a little bit of the big ripples and then the reflections then from the light. So actually the user manual is this seesaw flashlights that are hanging in the middle that spell the words river is on the wall. And then when you pick up the flashlight, you then complete the sentence and then you tell what the river is. The river is the beginning or whatever it is. So we encoded different meanings that you go and discover what is the meaning of the river to you. This was the sort of, you could see that this was quite a tedious process. And in a few years back, I talked with Kyle MacDonald, and it was very beautiful. He's kind of summarizing thing like, so we were working on these things roughly at the same time, and he was saying that okay, so you did it the German way, and we did it the American way. So this is basically just a pile of disco balls and a projector aligned, or several projectors aligned to the disco balls, and then using computer vision where you could then calculate where the lights end up so that you can kind of reshuffle the pixels, and again you can then start controlling the projections on the wall after having kind of figured out where all the different rays go. So this is like, yeah, beautiful kind of, so much simpler and less hassle as a team, but probably so much more hassle for individual head to figure it out how to do this. Anyway, so that was the German way versus the American way. Now, all of these things kind of, these are now, so for us, the way we are doing development is we have our own, so hopefully you could see that this is a trajectory. So it's not that these kind of things come out of the blue. They are part of a design process that kind of transcends the different individual installations. So every project tells us a lot about how to do things, what work, what are the different parameters that we can tweak, and they range from timing to money to material to software, everything. So for us, we try to have this bigger picture, and right now what I'm wrapping here is the kind of a shift from computational processes controlling stuff on screen to computational processes controlling stuff in space. We do this in project basis, so we rarely have the possibility to reflect and kind of do something that you would normally do in product development where you iterate. So we have a project and we iterate with prototypes, but when it's done, it's done. And then we end up doing something different that looks something very different, even though the mindset might be the same. We had a special opportunity in Berlin in this temporary art space called MADE, where they kind of look at interdisciplinary artworks where different artists from different fields are put together to create something new temporarily. So we took this as an opportunity. So we were put together with Olafur Arnalds, an Icelandic contemporary composer, to create an event for a couple of weeks. So we took this opportunity as a way to look at, like introspect with what we have been doing. So what you see here is 5 different prototypes that maybe you recognize the first one on the left and one in the middle and then the third one with these triangles. These were prototypes that we had built to get things done for client projects. Then we put those prototypes in a box and forget about them. Since the prototypes are there to try things out and figure out what things work and what not, we rarely have enough time to really reflect on the qualities of these new kinds of forms of expression. So these were prototypes for these things, and now we gave them new life as kind of dancers on stage or actors on stage for temporary performance. They are very fragile, so it couldn't be a permanent installation, but it could be sustained for a couple of weeks. And then we created kind of a overall choreography where these different actors would have their solo moments and they would play together, and the whole thing was composed as one thing together with Olafur. And here's a little glimpse of how it looked like. Data to Olafur, and he would use that as MIDI signal to compose the music. And for this one dialogue, he would be like doing inspirational or like ad-libbing by looking at the movement. Probably can also see a little bit of how, I dare say this is much more powerful by being much simpler, because it really kind of takes full advantage of the physical presence and the digital control at the same time. So instead of trying to overcomplicate things with the extra projection mapping and the custom software, suddenly we have this ray tracing calculations built in by having a spotlight shining into a reflective surface, and then you just use the physical movement that is anyway there to compose the light animations as well. Now this was really, for me, it was a huge thing, like understanding that by taking even more time reflecting on how to do things and kind of getting the fine nuance of these new interfaces and new media, what you can do with it. So we've learned a lot from that, and then continued on this path to combine the kind of more like a performative presence in space. So this is a performance, me talking here, and there's something fragile, things could go wrong, that makes it special. And it's something else than what you have fixed and hard-coded somewhere else. So the kind of this human communication that takes place in physical space is something that I found very powerful in this choreographed performance, and not a permanent installation that people can come and go. So This work, RGB CMY Kinetic, this is something that we were commissioned by Sonar. If you know the music festival, Sonar, started in Barcelona. So Sonar, and then it's all over the place. Sonar is a kind of electronic music festival. It's a huge thing. Sonar, together with Fundació Zorrigues, which is an arts collector or arts collector based in Barcelona. They commissioned us to do a site-specific artwork for the duration of Sonar Festival for 4 days. And since it's a huge base, we couldn't create something that we build in 2 days or install on-site in 2 days that has hundreds and hundreds of motors. So we used this principle of having 2 wires connected to a single element and have several of them moving in space. But then we created it into a performance, again collaborating with Olafur with the stage. So it feels like an act, a theater piece, a ballet, something like this. The actors here are red, green, and blue. So red, when you mix red and green together, you get yellow. When you put them red, green, and blue, you get white. So you get red, green, and blue as the additive colors, and subtractives, the cyan, magenta, and yellow. And that's the kind of that's the core of the work. So we have white light, and then the primary colors and the in-betweens as the elements. So this is the technical setup. But in the end, the technical setup, if you do test patterns, is only so much. But if you then start thinking of this as a ballet or as a performance on stage, it can become something else. We also did like a live performance set where Olafur and string quartet played the music on site. But for the overall duration of the show, of the festival, it was a looping story. And here you can get a kind of little glimpse of how it felt. I find it really kind of very inspiring with this work is that in the end, the way you compose the music, with the electronic music, you are using a lot of the same sort of signal processing methods that we then developed in our software of controlling the physical movement. We have like 5 stereo channels, if you will. So 5 objects with 2 motors, left and right, and then we would run different oscillators, sine waves or sawtooth waves. We would crossfade them. We apply a filter. All of the things that are very common in making music, and then we exchange the music data with the composer, and the composer gives us his composition, and it becomes this kind of a play where the making of the music and the making of the movement really blend together. This was also, and then suddenly again, like the kind of interaction with the movement, with the light in space and where people are standing around, it again gets kind of completely new dimension that you cannot plan for. And therefore, for us, it's always like, when doing these kind of installations, we try to maximize the time on site to tweak. And this is very hard for client projects because the tweaking, like you want to know what you get. And what you can get the best is something that fits the space the best, which is that you need to have the space ready and you need to kind of feel the space, you work in the space to get the best result. So this is a kind of a continuous struggle where you kind of try to promise that no, it will be great, but we just get it finished only the last day before the opening. And it's of course also a lot of emails and talks that I need to then conduct to get to convince that this is indeed the best way. Yeah, the artwork had a second iteration in ACT, ACT Center in South Korea, where we got a little bit better lights and different form factor, and we ended up adding the key component. So those of you coming from print, CMYK is of course including key, which is the black channel to get the printed graphics kind of pop out. So this is the key. There's one light that is not RGB, but it's white light creating the black shadows. Okay, so this was now the first part of the talk. So this was now the kind of a one tangent of what ART+COM Studio is doing. We are doing many other things, but I thought that the kind of exit theme, exiting the bounds of the screen, would be kind of a relevant story, and how making the machines with which we make these is as much of the making as the choreographing and then the designing with those things. And the kind of a reflection that takes place between making the machine and figuring out what it's good for and reflecting on what are the best ways of using it and leaving and giving time for that, and not just saying, okay, somebody else has done this, we use this, and we use what it's used for ourselves as well. So every technology comes with the baggage of what it was originally designed for. So lots of computer games, graphics come from military, and there's a little bit of the kind of uneasy balance from the source of that. And here we have lots of kind of hardware that comes from like factories and conveyor belts and this kind of servo motor controls. They are factory equipment, industrial factory equipment that then here becomes something quite different. So this was the first part, and now I still have 15 minutes for the second part. I jump to the university, and those of you here who are coming more from like a product design world, maybe this is kind of closer to your world. So over the last 3 years, we ran this research project called Rethinking Prototyping, and this was a collaboration with the University of Arts and the University of Technology in Berlin. Interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary, all those things that are inherently always supposed to be, better because they're trans and inter and all this kind of stuff, but often these are also giving you expectations of something else. So transdisciplinary doesn't mean that it's better. It means that it's a space to explore different kinds of things, different ways of doing that should be given the possibility to fail. It's not necessarily that better things come out of something that different disciplines mix together. This part out of this bigger project that was the Rethinking Prototyping my part was called Beyond Prototyping, and what I tried to do with the project was to look at the kind of gray space between mass producing objects and making one-off things. So the digital fabrication, the rapid prototyping tools, how are they used in the creating of the final thing and not the prototype, not the model, not the mock-up. So between mass production and making one-offs, between the atelier service and the copy shop, and then between something that is functional and something that is emotional. So that was the space that I wanted to look at. What are the things that we can do with these new methods, algorithmic design, digital fabrication, that kind of is somewhere in between these extremes, because 3D printing is more expensive than injection molding. It takes more time, but at the same time you have more control to fit it to your foot or to your, other physical dimensions, or it can you can choose the color, but what are the things that really make sense to configure? So the kind of physiological optimization is clear, but then you choosing a color is very arbitrary. So we try to find what is the narrative, what is the story that makes sense to design and to leave it to the algorithm versus then explicitly choose. So I'll show you 3 concepts that came out of this research project. The first one, 3 concepts and 3 websites. So I made 3 websites. One is ciphering.me, which is basically 3D, like generative 3D jewelry. So basically, the way it works is that you have a sweet spot. So these are the rays in OpenSCAD. If you use OpenSCAD, this is very, very nice, solid modeling scripting language with which you can create 3D geometry. So there's a point in space that if you look through that point, the rays kind of penetrate through this ring, and then the ring becomes encoded with the message that you project through it. The message is not legible before you align it correctly. So this whole thing is a website. On the website, you as a user are not you as the designer. So you as the user decide 4 digits. And then the physiological parameters like the size and then the material. And then with those four digits, the algorithm calculates a geometry that encodes those 4 digits as pixels so that when you align it right, they become deciphered, they become legible. But only then. So it's like the stuff that is normally inside the ring, it becomes the ring itself. And so me as a designer decide the language, the thickness of the ridges so that it's mechanically solid enough so that it doesn't break, that it's 3D printable in this kind of a lost wax cast method, meaning that it's 3D printed in wax and then cast with real silver or gold so that the resulting thing is manufacturable. So I decide all the parameters that are about the function and the aesthetic, and you as the user decide what do you want to say with it, or what do you want to hide with it. Okay, and the whole thing runs as a web service so that then you do the ordering online and then the product gets sent to you. So once I designed this, I never really, nothing ever comes to my door and I never do anything with it. Different way of looking at this digital fabrication is to look at the kind of a network of makers together, because oftentimes 3D printing has the shortcoming of the material quality. You can't mix materials, you're quite limited to the size. They're small things, they're plastic, maybe they're rubber, but you don't have the kind of full gamut of material haptic quality that you have when you're making things traditionally or industrially. So Locatable or Locatable, it's another service that is basically using OpenStreetMaps as the starting point, where geocoordinates, so the user defines the geocoordinates and that's it. The whole idea kind of started with this kind of realization that the street network it's a useful thing to understand where you are in space, and if you had it in instead of on the wall as a functional map, if it was like an everyday product, it could become it could feed everyday conversations in a peripheral way. So what we did, we spent a lot of time in the workshop, in series of workshops actually, and the workshops were, even though this is a university project, these workshops were not the university workshops. These were small studios distributed in Berlin, because we wanted to create something that is feasible as a real service. So this one guy, Mason, today he's got a 3D milling shop, and we worked closely with him to find the parameters, the right milling bit, the speed of operating the machine, so that we could create street map engraved tabletop within 20 minutes or less. Then we spent lots of time with Laurentiu about how to cast those grooves carved into the table with transparent resin to get the physical haptic quality of a tabletop as a high-end product, so that it feels right, that it feels good, and it looks appropriate. And then integrating that with the sort of a final polish, sanding down, oiling, and all this kind of stuff, so that it really is like a high-quality, handmade product, but coordinated through software and a website that results in a tabletop that has your area of choosing carved as a street map on the tabletop. So this is I took this screenshot this morning. If you know this area, you might recognize the picture. But it's not a functional map in a sense that it doesn't have any of the street names. It gives you kind of a context. If you know the place, it makes sense, but if you don't, it doesn't. So it's looking at the kind of how traditional design, this is now super simplified. Traditionally, design process would be designer does the design, then a producer liaises with the factory and makes all the industrial manufacturing parts. The stuff gets delivered to the shop, and then you get it as a consumer. Whereas in our model, the designer creates the DNA of a design, and the DNA of the design gets distributed between different service providers that then together with the feedback from the consumer, create a product. So the design process is suddenly much, much bigger. Actually, it probably should also include the consumer in this graph. And then the last thing, this is a third website, just a website. I made 3 websites. The third website is called Highlight, and the Highlight is a service that, well, I just showed the video, this makes the most sense. It's a service that first you get this custom 3D scanner sent home. You screw it into the lamp socket, into the place where you want to have the lamp. Then you flick the light switch, and then the scanner scans a 3D model of the room. You then load it into your computer, and then in the 3D model, you as the user, you don't design the lamp. You design where you want the light. So you're painting the light into the room in the places that you would like to have it, and then as a result, the algorithm decides how the lampshade is supposed to look like to yield this desired result. And then you get this funky, spiky thing. And this spiky thing is then only meaningful in that place where you screwed the scanner in the first place. Yeah. So this is how it then looks like in space, and this is again like you cannot do this. So the meaningfulness stays with the user. Now, of course, the kind of a shortcoming of this project was that this a custom hardware with some Arduino and stepper motors inside that you screw into the 220-volt light socket in the ceiling. It's slightly suspect. So this was certainly not CE certified, and the fact that you need this device is suboptimal. Now, in the end, what we do with this kind of design, we realize that actually we don't need the 3D geometry. It makes it easy to manipulate, but 360 pictures do the same, because all we need to do is just, because we have the point of view where the light is, we don't, so it's like we see everything that the lamp can see if we take the picture from the point of view of the lamp. So this way you can just take a 360 picture and then paint the light and download the 3D model. So I think, so these 3 surfaces, I think this one is the interesting one. So this is now a hotel room, but yesterday 2 days ago, I went to this most fantastic space called Fab Cafe, and I took some pictures. So let's see how so if we make a new lighting for Fab Cafe, so this is now the Fab Cafe, and I could say that, okay, we want to have maybe light over there, and actually the coffee tables, they definitely need light. I don't know, where else? Maybe we hang some artwork over here. And these tables as well, up over there and here, and now, thank you very much. So then here we have our lampshade that would be hanging in one of those lamp sockets. So anyone who's got a 3D printer could maybe that. So maybe one day we'll see this at the Fab Cafe. Okay. Yeah, that's what I wanted to say. So thank you very much.
Do you have any particular book you would say that have great influence over your mindset as a designer?
Great mindset to a designer. Well, I hope that what I showed today is kind of, that's what I tried to say. So that for this mindset for designer is that instead of taking things for granted, so that you use predefined ways of doing things or systems, if you think of the systems for making as part of your design. So whether it means that you create your own medium like a kinetic sculpture, and then you design with it, you have completely different position to think of what it's good for, where the elegant solutions are. Or like with this digital fabrication things is that you can think of the design process, how to come to the result as a bigger thing. So I think that's the mindset that I have. I mean, maybe it's not generalizable, but this kind of an open-ended look of outside the boundaries of what you are doing to think of what other people traditionally in this chain of making are doing, and if possible, bring those involved into the design. That is very powerful. The other thing is also to understand the kind of a political situation where you're designing. Design is not it's not realistic to have this kind of a superstar designer who scribbles something on paper and then do this. Like everything is this kind of a complex parameter space, kind of a different fitness function criteria filling system. And some of them are more aesthetic or cultural, and others are financial or mechanical or timeline, these kind of things. But all of these things are essentially part of the design. So the more you can be aware and understand those different aspects, the better you are as a designer.
Can you give us an example of a project that did not work?
Well, I could talk about all of these projects how they didn't work. So for example, this Four Rivers, this kind of or River Is installation with this the German way of making reflective sculptures is that it works beautifully, but in order for it to work, you as a visitor need to understand it. If you don't understand it, it's like, okay, pixels flying through the space, big deal. So if you don't have the time, which is often the case that people come, okay, interactive installation, what do I do? Do I wave my hands? Where's the button? Do I make a sound? Where's the microphone? If you don't kind of bring the people to the right mindset, they don't see the work that is in front of their face. So that didn't work in that sense. And what else could I say? So then there was in Singapore airport, there was a situation when one person decided that the drops are so beautiful that she decided to try to get one. And yeah.
Oh no.
So that also was a bad idea. It didn't work.
How you influence customer about change the static installation art to interactive installation art? They think the interactive use much more money than static. It's a waste to invest. How to change it?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's really changing. You could see, I mean, I showed that marketing video from the result of the BMW installation. Like when you get this more and more these kind of cases make the point that the impact of doing something different is hugely more impactful. So I think that is, so, and it's happening everywhere. So it's really like, it's not just us, it's many studios and that are doing like this. And now more than ever, it's possible to think outside the kind of constraints of a single discipline. So like things have become much more modular and easier to connect together in new ways. So that's definitely happening. I had another line of thought, but I forgot.